Okay. Hi, Chuck. Thank you for inviting me to give a short presentation on the product called Asia Redox. Now, the story began almost 20 years ago when I started working on food as medicine because I found that patients who come to me had their problem over the last 15 years. And during those long time period, they develop no symptoms. But when they come to me, they have a full-blown disease that require medications. But knowing how disease develop in patients, I took on the job of uh, finding out what is the cause of their problem. And that led me to working food as medicine. And over the last 20 years, I have been looking at the old wisdom of texts by the Chinese, by the Indians, by the Russians, and and so on and so forth. After years of studies, I found that all the disease converge onto one molecule. We call it NRF2. Now, this molecule was discovered about 30 years ago. And it takes care of our problem mainly because when we were born with the gift of the Almighty God that any problem that occurs in us has a natural way of being solved. So that is the beginning of my story. Now, this slide shows the chemical plants when they use oxygen to make their products. What you see in this slide is a cloud, and in that cloud you see a lot of very highly reactive oxygen molecules. We call it uh, reactive oxygen species or ROS. This is what goes on in the factory, but in our body, if we have inflammation, this is how it looks like without patients knowing it. But over the years, they develop problems like diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, stroke, and so on and so forth. Now, what is the cause of all this? Over the years, doctors have been wondering how disease comes about. The consensus of opinion over the last 20 years is that all disease comes from the same problem, that is inflammation. And now there's another new word added onto that. They call it inflammaging, a combination of inflammation plus aging. So we call it inflammation. So this is a new word coined just about 20 years ago. How does it come about? The story of inflammation has stretched over 2000 years. And it was first categorized or written or documented by a Roman encyclopedist who says that inflammation is characterized by redness, swelling, heat, and pain. About a few hundred years later, a German pathologist added another characteristic. He called it when you get inflammation, you also get loss of the function, like you couldn't move your hand and you couldn't walk properly, and so on and so forth. Now, the whole story of inflammation was not solved until my mentor, Sir John Vane, when I went to work with him in the late 60s. One morning, he came to my lab and said, Kevin, I think I know how aspirin works. He asked me to set up the apparatus for him, and then he came in with all his solutions. He brought three graphs on it, and he proved to the world that aspirin works by inhibiting the production of a chemical called prostaglandins. So that took nearly about 2000 years before we came to know what inflammation is all about. But with the modern science, we now know that inflammation is actually caused by the release of chemicals from the white blood cells, your immune cells, from the blood vessels, and from the fibroblasts, and so on and so forth. All these chemicals work on the blood vessels, they dilate, so you get the warmth. And it also works on stimulating nerve endings. That's why you get pain. So the inflammation is characterized by redness, swelling, warmth, and pain, plus a loss of function. Now, that is the beginning of the understanding of inflammation about 60 years ago. I was fortunate to work with John Wayne because with him, I used the technique that I improved and I discovered the angiotensin converting enzyme in the lung. And that led to the discovery of a prototype ACE inhibitor. We call it ACE inhibitor from the snake venom. The company called Squid took over the project and they came up with a drug called capoten, the first ACE inhibitor used clinically. Now that ACE inhibitor have saved millions of lives over the uh, last 40 years or so. So when I review the benefits that the ACE inhibitor uh, offer to the patients, I say that I have solved one problem. I have to solve another problem, and that was the root cause of a disease. And then the story came on towards the late 1990s. A couple of patients who came to my clinic, the husband grossly obese and full of morbidity like hypertension, high cholesterol, chest pain, neuropathy, and so on and so forth. Whereas the wife was slim, healthy. So one day, I asked the wife come into my office, and I asked her, "What you know about your husband that I don't know?" So I made inquiry into their habits and found that the husband, whenever they pass a restaurant, the husband automatically will walk into the restaurant. And whereas I asked her habit, she said, "Doc, I eat very healthy." I said, what do you mean healthy? She said, "I eat a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits. I don't eat too much. And I walk every 2 or 3 miles every morning." I say, So that is a clear example to me that food is the main cause of the husband's disease. And then I took on the project in around 20 years ago. I told my wife that I need to understand how food can cause a disease. And that was the beginning of my journey. My wife's mother was a physiotherapist. She used to macerate or pound the ginger, the turmeric, and so on and so forth. And she applied it over the swollen joints of patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And she's a great healer because a lady who had not conceived for almost 10 years came to see her, and she applied the herbs over the abdomen, and she massaged. She's a masseur. She massaged it, and that lady ended up with triplets. Phenomenal achievement. I said, I have to learn everything about that. Mama, you have to teach me. So I started my journey on food. I said, if food is good, it must have anti-inflammatory property. Then I work on turmeric, ginger, menthol, and you name it, I work on it. I use it topically just to prove to myself that the food actually is medicine. All right, I go on to the next slide. Now, what actually happens when the body is inflamed? The basic problem is that when oxygen, you see, we breathe in oxygen, we give out carbon dioxide. So the lung does a fantastic job. So in those days, people thought that the lung has only one function. But I proved to the scientific world, the lung is also a gatekeeper of chemicals released from one part of your body and bypass the lung and go to the systemic area. Now, the lung actually acts as a filter, unknown to the doctors 40 or 50 years ago, that the so-called local hormones released locally is trapped. Some of them are trapped in the lungs so that your arterial circulation is free from damage. And I show with the new technique that the inactive compound called angiotensin 1 is converted to the most highly chemical that raise the blood pressure.
To make a long story short, these discoveries directly led to the development of a new drug named captopril in the early 1980s, which is the first of its kind, the ACE inhibitors, very important blood pressure medicine and also important for heart failure and diabetic kidney damages. Even to this day, Still the first line.
Now, because when the body uses up oxygen, the oxygen lose an electron, and they become highly active. The speed of this reaction is millisecond, very, very quickly. So when the body uses up oxygen, it releases a highly reactive chemical called free radical. Now, our body is using glucose all the time, continuously, whether you are asleep or you are awake, continuously. If your body don't use the glucose, the person is usually dead. And this is found by the fact that the moment the patient stop breathing and dead, and the amount of glucose present in the blood is enormous, enormous. So where do the where do the reactive oxygen occur mostly in our body? It is in the brain. The brain actually produces almost 80 to 90% of the reactive oxygens. Now, under normal circumstances, a normal adult has only about one 10 to power of 21. That's the amount of reactive oxygen. But for a person who had a chronic disease like diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, the level goes up to 5 times. Now, what about patients who are subjected to radiotherapy? Go up to 1,000 times. What if a person is exposed to the atomic bomb? It is how many zeros are there? One, two, three, 10 million. 10 million times. So it is this reactive oxygen species that cause all the problem in the human body. As long as you use oxygen, you use glucose, you produce reactive oxygen species. Now, this is a graph representation of the amount of exposure to the reactive oxygen in the case of atomic blast. As compared to a normal person, you only have a fraction of it. But when you are sick, you have 5 times more. So you virtually you're a walking bomb. Now, 30 years ago, scientists have been looking for problems, how disease is developed. They came to the conclusion that there are molecules in our body that help us to solve the problem. And then that's uh, how the nerve tube was discovered. I think around the same time, this company called ASIA was trying to develop something that works, that activate the chemical we call it nerve tube. Now, this is a master regulator of inflammation by neutralizing the reactive oxygen. So ASEAN, they came up with the idea that perhaps they could develop something that could activate it. So the ASEAN Redox becomes a nerve tube activator. And through the last 6 months or so, I found that it is the only company that has about 100 patents. And then they make the products, ASEAN, out of the salt and water. And that company has applied for 100 patents on it. And then their products are sold all over the world, 35 countries, I was told, over the last 15 years. It is considered as a supplement because to qualify as a drug, you have to go through 4 phases of tests: phase one, phase two, phase three, phase four. But because this ASIA is made strictly from salt and water, so it's a natural chemical. And if anything that is natural, the FDA waive all the trials, all the tests to prove that it actually works. And I found in the literature or in the testimonials among the people who sold it, and Chuck was the one who introduced me to this product. So I asked him, what do people take Asia? What is the best benefit that they tell of that they experience? He said 80% of them say they're pain. I say, but they don't talk about it because they don't realize that ASEAN works not only on the nerve tube, but it also works on another chemical, another product in the body called nuclear factor kappa beta. I'll go into that detail in the next talk. Today, I will concentrate only on the nerve 2. Now, there's a long story about nerve 2. It was discovered about 30 years ago, 1994. But through the years, a lot of scientists have been targeting this as a therapeutic marker. So few companies have come up with synthetic stuff. And the first trial was made on patients with uh, uh, what was it? Oh, multiple sclerosis. Yeah, multiple sclerosis is a strange disease. And because the brain used the most produce the most reactive oxygen. So that is a group of patients that they can try on. The success was good. So other companies are now jumping into this area. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, more and more products related to the nerve 2 activation comes about. But while doing this, I found that a lot of food actually they are activators. Like the most powerful activator for the nerve 2 compound is the extract called sulforaphane from the broccoli seeds, And after that, we found the omega-3 X on it, and so on and so forth. But while I was working on these products, I had difficulty in standardizing it. I could not tell. So my results were inconsistent. So I was looking for something that maybe from the company, that synthesize the nerve too. But I found that, I'm more prone to natural products than the synthetic because God made us differently in trying to metabolize the synthetic product. Now, to understand the redox, you have to understand the cells. This is the structure of the cells. All I want you to remember is the mitochondria, which is a powerhouse of metabolism. It uses glucose and turn it into ATP. Now, ATP is a source of chemical for energy. So every cell uses ATP. Then the nucleus. I want you to remember that in the nucleus, there are DNA. And DNA are components in the cell that do a lot of work for the cell. Then in the cytoplasm, there are uh, molecules we call nerve 2. This is the one I want to talk about. The other one is the opposite of the nerve 2. It's a nuclear factor, kappa beta. This is found in the beta cells, the lymphocytes. And then the cell membrane. Now, this is where your omega-3 is located, where your omega-6 is located. Now, they are the composition or the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is very important, but there's a sort of uh, uh, underrated uh, I call it ratio. So in the olden days, in the Paleo or Stone Age, people eat mainly plants. So their ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in the membrane, that is about 2:1. But right now, because of the fast food, because of the industrialized cooking oil, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in America is about 25:1. In the last webinar I went to, one of the speakers said that she has seen patients with 45:1. That is very, very bad. Now, when your ratio is high, your body is burning all the time without you knowing it. Uh, so this, all I want to do is a few areas, mitochondria, the cell membrane, and then the transcription factors found in the cytoplasm, and the nucleus DNA. So what really happens when your body is using the uh, using glucose, burning it with the oxygen? The brain is the thing that produces the most reactive oxygen. So this is why I always suspect that if you use the ASEA product, you reduce the concentration of reactive oxygen species in the brain. You protect actually. In fact, there are some studies done in Japan where they use hydrogen to treat people with acute brain injury, and their results seems to be quite good. So that we have to follow up on that. Now, what really happens when a person is bombarded by all these highly reactive oxidant molecules? It activates. There are two components. Nerve 2, that's what I'm going to talk about, and this is nuclear factor kappa beta. So in the body, there is a balance between these two items. When the body is inflamed, this is activated. The nuclear factor is active. When this is activated, this one will suppress. There's a crosstalk between these two items. So let's concentrate today on nerve 2. I'll talk about this in the later. Now, this is the so-called nerve 2. It was discovered about 30 years ago. 30 years ago. We know that when this is activated, it works on the genes in the DNA. When these genes are activated, it produces a lot of antioxidant enzymes. What do? They neutralize the uh, free radicals and convert it into water and oxygen. Very simple process. And this solves a lot of problems. Now, what about the opposite arm of inflammation? When this is activated by reactive oxygen, it produces a lot of chemical enzymes, And out of all these enzymes, we could only stop this COX-2. Now, this is the one that my mentor and I found that aspirin blocked only this part. All the others were unaffected. But in the 60s, in the late 60s, we did not know anything about cytokines. Now, cytokines are small molecules produced by the immune cells that cause all the problem. In fact, the level of cytokines are so high in the COVID-19 that these are the chemicals that kill the patients, not the virus, not the COVID-19 virus. It is the cytokines, especially the tissue necrosis factor and IL-1B and IL-6. Now, the cytokines is a phenomenal group of chemicals that are very bad for the body. In fact, over the last 50 years, we have discovered many cytokines. When I was a student or a young doctor, we did not know anything about this. But just in the late 70s, scientists are beginning to find out more and more. So there are about 130 cytokines. These are the chemicals that kill, that cause all the problems in us, pain, uh, damage of the tissues. You got fibrosis. You get a lot of problems. Now the cytokine is a very strange group of chemicals, and we doctors always like to block it. If it's a problem, we block it. You block it with chemicals and so on and so forth. But over the last 50 years, 130 cytokines were discovered. Two-thirds of it are inflammatory, and about 10 to 20% are anti-inflammatory. No, so your body is equipped with a natural system to block it. And the strange thing about the cytokine is that most of that work locally, and then its half-life maybe a few seconds or few minutes, Then it also work on the neighbors. And then the last of all, some of the cytokine escape the destruction locally, and it escapes by destruction in the lung. So only a few of the cytokine get into the systemic circulation. Like for example, the TNA. Now TNA is a very nasty cytokine because it causes fever, and so as the IL-6. So all these cytokines are problem makers, and then the drug companies are now focusing on the development of blockers, and they are very expensive. Like for example, people with psoriasis, they are treated with Remicade. People with rheumatoid arthritis are treated with Remicade. The cost per year is nearly $100,000 to $200,000. I think that we are treating the cost and not treating the root cause. We are treating only the symptoms. So there's a lot to talk about it. So this is why the pharmaceutical companies are now interested in developing biologics, because the profit margin there is huge. Now, this is a good transcription factor found in the cytoplasm. It is anti-inflammatory. Now, we have natural substances, we can activate this. Exercise, for example, fasting, you can activate it. RC, you can activate it. The latest report I had from RC people is that the RC can activate the nerve tube up to about 60%. And with the increase in the nerve tube in the circulation, they also found that the glutathione. Now, glutathione is a very powerful antioxidant made of four amino acids, and people are selling it on the internet as a supplement for nerve tube. But the RC works by a different mechanism. It activates the enzyme. The enzyme maybe 60 days to 120 days, to get it activated. And once activated, it prolonged. So this is a fascinating subject for me to study. And I'm looking forward to some of the latest uh, findings on how they activate the different kinds of genes, in the DNA. So there's a lot of interesting projects that I'm looking forward to. Now, this is the NF. This is a nasty one. We doctors cannot handle this. We can only use aspirin, ibuprofen to block this cyclooxygenase. That is our contribution towards the world. But now the pharmaceutical companies are focusing on the blockers for the cytokines, in particular the TNF and IL-6. Now this is a field that the pharmaceutical companies are concentrating on because there is huge profit here. Now, as I said, reactive oxygen species attack the body in two ways. It attacks the good and the bad, but more often than not, it's the bad one. And we have only minimal number of drugs to solve this problem. Like aspirin, Aleve, uh, Aleve. The other one is ibuprofen, aspirin, and diclofenac. All these only act on one pathway, but we should be activating the nerve too, because when you activate this, you suppress this one. So it's a seesaw for the phenomenon. Acid play is a role because it's natural. Whereas if you approach this on the inflammatory pathway, you are approaching the end result. So when I put up a post in the social media, how would you treat yourself to prevent the chronic disease? 80% of them said they would prefer natural stuff. I say, go for your exercise, go for eat the right food, and then you are protected. Otherwise, by the time you come to me, I have to treat you with medicines, and that's too late. You miss the window of opportunity by nearly about 5 to 15 years. Now we go back to the question of cytokine. These are the troublemaker. This is the trouble that cause all the uh, uh, hardening of the arteries, heart failure, stroke, and so on. Now let us talk about how is inflammation brought about. There are two types of inflammation we talk about. One is the acute, the other is chronic. Now, in the acute inflammation, you find there are two phases: the the inflammation and the resolution phase. The body is equipped with a mechanism to solve the problem that you experience. So during the acute phase, the inflammation sets in, but then your body turn on the good pathway, and that is to produce chemical from omega-3 fish oil, and then that will counteract it. And if the balance is achieved, inflammation will set out to the base, and then the whole thing lasts maybe for a couple of days to week, for example. If you get mosquito bite, it clears up within about 48 hours. Then you have no problem. But then what happens if the inflammation fails? If if inflammation will set on again, so you get another phase of inflammation. Then your omega-3 comes in again. It will try to solve it, but the restoration is not complete. So you have a continuous up and down, up and down. So this is a characteristics of chronic inflammation. By definition, chronic inflammation is anything longer than a year or so. So the diabetes, for example, is years, 10 to 20 years. Hypertension, you used to be maybe about 10 years to 20 years. So all these problems shorten the life of patients. So I asked Paul, I said, which organ is hit first by inflammation? Most of them say the adrenal glands. Now, the answer to that question is the earliest sign of damage is the endothelium, is your capillaries. After all, your capillaries, if you stretch out the capillaries, it go around the world twice, 60,000 miles, you know. And if you spread it over a football field, your capillary occupy one football field. So the first target in any disease is the capillaries. And now there are devices that can put it under the tongue, and you could see any damage done to a layer of tissue called uh, glycocalyx. Now we have means to look into the capillaries before anything happens. I know the developer and the company very well, and I said they found that, for example, if your sugar is high, you give a infusion of a glucose into the blood, those glycocalyx will be destroyed. And once it's destroyed, like in the case of a diabetic, your capillary junction will be widened up. So the toxin will get into the capillary wall, and that is where the hardening of the capillary will occur. Your cholesterol will get inside there, and the foam cells will develop, and so on and so forth. So we have means now. We have means to check the capillary. We also have a product called Redox that you can repair it. Now, this is the progression. Now, patients who come to me usually at this point, they are somewhere around 50 plus. They have diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, gout, obesity. So all this, but then at this time they have lost nearly 10 years of their life. So here at this from 50 onward, I have to treat them aggressively with medicine and so on and so forth. But the ideal situation is have yourself check when you're about 35, because within this period, 35 to 50, there is no symptom. You don't feel anything, but your fire is burning. It is burning within you. So as doctors, I always say we are not very smart. Patients usually come to us too late. If they come to us earlier, we have ways and means to make them live longer and life with less complications. Now, what happens if your reactive oxygen species keep on mounting up? It affects almost every organ in your body, without you knowing it. And we have a means, we have a blood test, we have a CRP, we have ILs, the interleukin, cyto. We have ways and means to check it. But 50 years ago, we don't know anything about that. Now, so over the last 5 months or so, I tried to take the Redox just to find out what the effects are. I found it good in many ways, So it support. So Redox did help me a lot. I can give a testimony on how it works on me. If you compare the Redox with the ordinary antioxidant, this is a surprise to me, because in a clinical trial with antioxidants on doctors and nurses in a 10-year trial, the results were negative. So I said that if the redox were a powerful antioxidant, uh, why is it different from the uh, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E? All this failed because the probably redox acts on a different pathway. We call it redox pathway. Whereas the uh, vitamins, they are just a pure scavenger. They do not work like the redox. So what is redox then? Redox is actually a signal. It's a signaling molecule, just like what the body produces. But it is manufactured in a process that is a trade secret. I know how it really works, but the exact molecule is something like a molecule. It activates on the particular enzyme. And the latest study they have done is that they found that it activates 5 different genes. I say, this is phenomenal. I want to know more about this. So I'm waiting anxiously to see that report. Now, so this is the takeaway. Now, redox is actually a product uh, that mimics, that resembles the body's response to the overproduction of the reactive oxygen. It acts almost like the antioxidant, but it acts also on the genes in the DNA to provide the molecules that will neutralize, all the damaging molecules that affect our body. Okay, that sums up my talk on the nerve too. And in the next session, I think I'll go on to the clinical effects of the redox and the damaging effect of the other transcription factor, how it affects us and so on and so forth. All right, Chuck,